Hi everybody, I am back yet again. My name is Ashley Maready and I'm the Curator of Collections and Exhibitions for the Erie Canal Museum in downtown Syracuse, New York. The museum is still closed in response to the COVID-19 pandemic and our state's guidelines for non-essential businesses. Our full-time staffers are still working. We're putting together programming and educational information and programs just like this video for you. So we're putting them on our Facebook page, our website, and other social media. The reason that this video exists is because of the closure. So if you enjoy the video, we would be so grateful to you if you would become a member of our museum. You can make a tax-deductible donation to our annual fund. In this way, you can help to ensure our future by contributing to us today. I'll put a link in the comment section of this video so you can do just that. So let's get started. So as you can see, today we are going to be covering Small but Mighty, the history of the Oswego Canal. We'll start off today by learning why canals in general became so important to the history of New York and to the United States, and we'll focus in on the Oswego Canal specifically, which was created as a result of the success of the original Erie Canal. I'll discuss the Oswego Canal today, as it is part of the New York State Canal System. We'll talk about some history of the towns along the Oswego Canal, and the Oswego Canal is unique, as it is in fact the only route from the Atlantic Ocean, via the Hudson River, to Lake Ontario that is entirely within the United States. So if you've ever heard me speak before, you know that you never get a talk, from the Erie Canal Museum without your required dose of basic Erie Canal history. Sorry guys, it's just the way it is. The Erie Canal was America's first major engineering project, and it was the wonder of the early 19th century. But before the canal actually became a reality, it was a matter of some controversy despite the obvious need for it. At the time that a canal became a possibility, overland travel across the state of New York to reach the interior of the country and the Great Lakes was a difficult prospect, and it was nearly impossible at some parts of the year. After the Revolutionary War, the population of the United States was booming, going from 3.9 million in 1790 to 6.3 million in 1805. But the means of transportation were obsolete, and they were frankly a detriment to continued growth. Roads consisted of old Indian trails, which had been widened and packed down with dirt. They could be dusty in the summer heat and swampy in cold and wet weather, especially spring thaw. Winters in New York were just as brutal in the 18th and 19th centuries as they are now. In very marshy areas, the roads had logs set across them with dirt in between, which was an attempt to smooth the route. These were called corduroy roads. Waterways across the state lacked bridges to connect roads from one side to the other, and it made cargo passage extremely difficult. In 1800, it took a few weeks to travel overland from New York City to Cleveland. As luck would have it, New York's geography is favorable to a canal across the state. The Mohawk River Valley forms a natural pathway through the Catskill and Adirondack Mountains, so it made sense that a canal should be constructed through the state this way. In the late 18th and 19th centuries, Europe was having a canal mania, and successful canals were built in France, Germany, and Britain. The War of 1812 also showed the lack of decent transportation means to connect Lake Erie to the rest of the state, and the movement of equipment, men, and horses was very slow and very expensive. And this war also showed the importance of developing markets for American goods at home in America. So here is an 1809 map of New York State. So what was the big deal about canals anyway? Although canal technology seems very primitive to us, in the 19th century, canals were an incredible technological innovation. Canals are flat and calm, unlike a river, and it was really easy for a boat to carry a large amount of cargo over water as opposed to over land. Just a few minutes ago we were talking about the conditions of the roads, so I'm sure you can understand. Canal boats weren't motorized yet, and there was control over speed and steering. The driver that led the animals, which were mules and horses, pulling the boat by way of the towpath, all of these helped to control the motion of the boat. The cost of shipping cargo over a canal, as opposed to on land, was also vastly less, and it would become incredibly profitable to move more and more items to market, not to mention the advantage of moving people by way of a canal. For the Revolutionary War, General George Washington had expressed concerns about the loss of lands west of the Appalachian Mountains due to the French or Canadians, or both, due to a lack of geographical connection. After the war, Washington organized the Potomac Company to turn the Potomac River into a canal running from the coast up to the mountains. This project was a disaster financially, and it was actually still under construction by the time of Washington's death. It was an achievement in engineering, though, so this kind of helped to prove that a canal was a possibility. At around the same time, there was a lot of talk about a canal project through New York State. The geography here was a lot more favorable than that of Virginia. It took a couple of decades to get the project together, though. There were questions about engineering problems, and then not to mention the question of how are you going to fund something that isn't guaranteed to pay its own way. And there were also questions about the route to be taken. While it would have been easier to make a shorter route to Lake Ontario, this plan wouldn't gain as much access to the Midwest, and as relations with the British declined leading up to the War of 1812, this idea was abandoned as they controlled Canada. So remember this idea because we're going to return to it here in a little while. So in 1809, Thomas Jefferson called the prospect of building a canal through the state of New York little short of madness. This is probably my favorite phrase used to describe the idea of constructing a canal through New York. Jefferson loved the idea, but he didn't think that this could be done. This, unfortunately, was also the prevailing national opinion, and so the prospects for federal funding became very unlikely. New York ended up funding the Erie Canal itself to the tune of $7 million. So the original Erie Canal was dug by hand, and it spanned the 363 miles across the state from the Hudson River to Lake Erie. It was 4 feet deep and 40 feet across, with 83 locks to span the over 570 feet of elevation change between Albany and Buffalo. It officially opened October 26, 1825, to fanfare and immediate success. Note that this was the first opening of the full canal. As sections of the canal were finished, they were open to use. So as soon as it was opened, it was already too small and not capable of handling all of the traffic that it attracted. And during and after the construction of the original canal, numerous lateral canals were built, including the Oswego Canal. So here's a map showing when different sections were completed. As soon as these sections were finished, they were open. So you could travel, a short length on the canal long before the whole thing was finished and opened. The enlargement of the canal began in the 1830s and lasted until the 1860s, with continued improvements going until the closure of the enlarged canal. The enlarged Erie Canal was increased to 70 feet across and 7 feet deep, and 11 locks were removed, taking the total down to 72. Along with the enlarging of the canal, additional branches were built, going in all directions across New York, including up to Oswego. So the original and enlarged canals were movers of people and ideas, as well as financial resources, raw materials, finished goods. Many people, a lot of new immigrants from Europe, they traveled on the canal to the interior of the country. They brought along their ideas and their culture with them. And the canal was sort of the information superhighway of the 19th and early 20th centuries. Women's suffrage, utopianism, the abolition movement, all of these ideas traveled and spread as a result of the canal. A lot of religious movements as well. So here's a map of the enlarged Erie Canal, and this map is from 1905, so just a couple of years before the enlarged canal was closed altogether. Was closed in the early 20th century, and the New York State Barge Canal was constructed beginning in 1905, opening May 10, 1918. This is the current canal system, and it was renamed the New York State Canal System several years ago. It covers 524 miles, and includes 4 different branches: the Erie branch across the state, along with the Cayuga-Seneca, the Champlain, and the Oswego canals. It makes use of natural waterways across much of the state, including the Mohawk and Oswego rivers, which have been canalized with locks added. In western New York, there really aren't suitable natural waterways in the right place for this, so the canal sections out there are still man-made. They are at a depth of 12 feet deep and a minimum of 120 feet across. The current system has 57 locks in total. Here is a map of the current system. I love how this is color-coded. Let's see a little tiny Oswego Canal there. So we are here today to talk specifically about the Oswego Canal, which is the second shortest branch of the New York State Canal System. Like the main Erie branch, the Oswego Canal has undergone some changes in its history as a waterway. So as I referenced earlier, when construction of the original canal across New York, which became the Erie Canal, was being considered, a route directly to Lake Ontario would have been the easiest route to take. This route would have involved enlarging and extending improvements made to the Mohawk River by the Western Inland Lock Navigation Company, locks around the Oswego River Falls, and the creation of a canal on the Niagara River so as to bypass Niagara Falls. Proponents of this plan argued that it was cheaper than going directly across the state to Lake Erie, and it was the more natural course to take, as if there's something natural about a man-made waterway. It utilized 200 miles of natural river and lake navigation. They said it could be constructed more quickly and that it would end up being less expensive to operate. In 1808, James Geddes was authorized to survey 2 possible routes to connect the Mohawk River to Lake Ontario. The first was by way of the Oswego River, and the second was through a tract of land owned by the Scriba Company between Oneida Lake and Lake Ontario. Getty recommended the first option, with the terminal basin to be located in Oswego Harbor on Lake Ontario. However, the War of 1812 got in the way of this initial canal plan. By the end of the war, the western New York counties along Lake Erie had helped to swing popular opinion to the notion of a canal spanning the state, from the Hudson River to Lake Erie. This route would benefit the whole state, rather than just the northern and eastern ends. Oswego also lacked legislative representation in Albany, and ultimately the original Erie Canal took the 363-mile route we discussed earlier. This wasn't the end of a discussion about a canal heading north to Lake Ontario. It was just an idea whose time had come. In 1819, the Canal Commission recommended the construction of a lateral canal running from Syracuse to the Salina Salt Works. The following year, the legislature granted $25,000 for a survey of the Oswego River. There were two plans to see the project forward: the creation of a series of dams to allow slack water navigation and a short canal around Oswego Falls, or a dug canal parallel to the Oswego River. Neither of these plans was settled upon, but the legislature authorized the digging of a canal from Salina to Onondaga Lake to link the Erie Canal and the Seneca and Oswego rivers. In 1823, the legislature told the Canal Commission to investigate the route, and 2 years later it accepted their report and cost estimate of $227,568.33 and voted the first appropriation for construction. Work officially began in 1826. The cornerstone of the very first lock at Fulton was laid on July 4, 1826, a mere 50 years after the signing of the Declaration of Independence. First iteration of the Oswego Canal was a bit different from the original Erie Canal in that it utilized the Oswego River whenever possible. So areas with sufficient depth unobstructed by rapids were canalized. Where this wasn't possible, a separate canal was dug. There were a total of 19.7 miles of independent canal and 18.56 miles of slack water navigation, for a total of 38.26 miles of the original Oswego Canal. The structures built to create this canal included 22 bridges, 7 culverts, 1 aqueduct across Waterhouse Creek near Fulton, and 2 waste weirs. There were 8 dams to control the flow of the river and 17 locks, with a total lift of 155 feet. The Oswego Canal's initial depth was 4 feet and the width was 40, so equivalent to the original Erie branch. So the canal originated in Syracuse, and when the museum's building, the Syracuse Waylock, was constructed in 1850, this is where it connected to the main Erie branch. One of the reasons why the Syracuse Waylock was the busiest of an eventual total of 7 in the canal system was because of its position at this junction. The canal ran from Syracuse to Salina to Liverpool along Onondaga Lake. It continued down the Seneca River and entered the Oswego River at Three Rivers Point, but diverted back to man-made canal at Phoenix and back and forth several times to avoid obstacles. So this is cool. This is a scan of the front section of an account book kept by William Jerome, an engineer who worked on the limestone feeder for the Erie Canal as well as the Oswego Canal after that. Date of completion had been set for the spring of 1828, but there was an illness epidemic among canal workers in 1827, reducing the labor supply. The lock contractor actually died from the fever, and other contractors were unable to finish their assigned tasks. The illness subsided in the cold winter, but came back the following summer. Weather also delayed the completion of the Oswego Canal, and the project was finally finished on December 10, 1828, after the canaling season was over. So the first boats didn't traverse the Oswego Canal until April 28, 1829. The total cost of the project was more than double the initial estimate, coming in at $565,437. It took a little time for the financial side of the Oswego Canal to really take off. A lot of the lateral canals constructed in the wake of the success of the Erie struggled to make money. To the chagrin of those living along the Oswego branch, their canal was lumped in with other lateral canals in financial reports, showing the difference in profits made between the Erie and other branches. First 2 years of operation on the Oswego Canal reflected this, and traffic on the canal was moderate, with a week in May of 1830 showing only 25 boat arrivals in Oswego and 23 boat departures. So that's kind of sad. At the beginning, the tolls collected weren't considered sufficient enough, especially based upon the fervent arguments in favor of construction, and there were critical pieces in the Buffalo Press arguing that the Oswego Canal was operating at a loss. These charges would be answered by the Oswego Palladium, which stated that the canal was augmenting the revenue commanded by the Erie Canal and promoting the salt industry in Salina. It also supplied the wood used to fuel the salt boiling blocks for no toll costs and increased land values in Oswego and the surrounding area. So here's an image of some of those salt drying sheds positioned along the Oswego Canal. This initial slump was not to last, however. 1830 was the turning point, and as the Welland Canal, which constructed Lake Ontario and Lake Erie on the Canadian side of the Niagara River, was completed. This meant that ships could travel from Oswego to Cleveland and Detroit without breaking cargo. The western grain trade was now open to Oswego and led to a boom in the milling industry. On August 4, 1830, the schooner Erie arrived from Cleveland, greeted by bells ringing, a 24-gun salute, flag displays, and massive congratulations. This is taken from an editorial in the Oswego Palladium. Thus, this great event, the offspring with us of so many hopes and fears and expectations and disappointments, has at length taken place, and with exulting hearts we hail the harbinger of the commerce of Erie. Another triumph of human ingenuity and wisdom is achieved. The hitherto insurmountable barrier of the Niagara is overcome, and the waters of Erie may now mingle with those of Ontario, bearing upon their bosoms the bounties of civilization and the gifts of the arts. If there be a spot on the western waters which more than any other is to reap the commercial harvest of which the Welland Canal is to be the parent, that spot is Oswego. To the 600 miles of coast to which we had access, 1,000 more are now added, comprising the most western counties of New York, the county of Erie in Pennsylvania, the shores of Ohio, Michigan, and Upper Canada, the abodes of a large and enterprising population stimulated by the wants and actively engaged in administering to the supplies of civilized life. It is needless to speculate, for imagination cannot compass the extent of that commerce which will inhabit the bosom of the northern lakes when the regions of the far west shall yield their spoil. Would that I could learn to write like a 19th century newspaper reporter. So this development was the beginning of the Oswego Canal's age of prosperity. Commerce on the canal and on Lakes Erie and Ontario boomed, along with shipbuilding and milling. The population grew steadily, and between 1830 and 1836, tolls collected increased from $3,600 to almost $54,000. Boat arrivals went from 546 to 2004. By 1835, 11 lake steamboats made weekly scheduled runs up and down the lake. 2 packet boats left Oswego daily for Syracuse, and 2 others made the reverse trip. This image is of the steam packet called City of Fulton, which provided freight and packet services on the Oswego Canal. There was also a daily packet boat that traveled to Utica. The fare costs went down so much that the Oswego Palladium said, "A man can hardly afford to remain at home." Financial upheavals in the 1830s affected the Oswego Canal's usage, but it bounced back. The continued success of the Oswego Canal is also partly linked to the creation of the Oneida Lake Canal side cut. This 5-mile canal was built in 1835 by the Oneida Lake Canal Company. It ran from the Erie Canal at Higginsville to Oneida Lake, near the mouth of Wood Creek. It had 7 wooden locks, an elevation fall of 56 feet, and similar dimensions to that of the Erie Canal. Wood products from the shores of Oneida Lake could be moved eastward into the Erie system, and eventually the tolls were reduced when the state purchased this small canal. Oswego merchants soon saw a way to capitalize on this new nearby canal. In 1838, the Oneida Lake and River Steamboat Company was organized. The idea here was that steamboats could be used on Oneida Lake, and the navigation on the Oneida River could be improved, so Erie traffic could be tapped at the junction of the Oneida Lake Canal and brought down the lake and river to the Oswego Canal at Three Rivers Point. This would shorten the travel distance between Albany and Oswego by 2 days, as well as bring additional traffic to Oswego. For the first few years, the company operated a small steamboat on the lake that served to tow barges to the entrance of the side-cut canal. Later on, locks were constructed and a regular towing service east and west between the side-cut and the Oswego Canal was created. Ultimately, 4 steamboats would be kept in operation. These were called the Oneida, the Onondaga, the Oswego, and the Madison. The company also maintained navigational aids, docks, and warehouses. They saved time and energy for those using the service, and at its peak, more than 3,000 barges a year were brought through from Higginsville towards Oswego, bringing in $60,000 in tolls in the year 1850. So this operation also added considerably to the success of the Oswego Canal. So here's some very happy folks hanging out on a canal dock in Fulton. And a lovely photo of the Oswego Canal alongside the Oswego River in Minetto. Off in the distance there, you can see a little boat traveling on the canal next to the river. And here is another canal boat traveling on the Oswego Canal. Not sure of the location on this one. And a steam packet on the Oswego Canal in Syracuse. And finally, we have some tugboats in Oswego Harbor. By the 1850s and 1860s, traffic remained heavy, but the Oswego Canal, like the main Erie Canal, was under threat from the railroads. They cut travel time down dramatically, and if you could get from point A to point B in a quarter of the time, why wouldn't you do it? There was even a propaganda drive that involved handbills being given to passengers on trains between Utica and Syracuse, stating that travel on Lake Ontario was dangerous and to be avoided. During this period, the main Erie branch was also continually being improved, and while the Oswego Canal was enlarged and improved a few times, it didn't receive the same level of treatment as the main canal. The tolling of salt also caused problems. Rebates for salt tolls were granted for the Erie, but not for the Oswego. The salt trade had become very closely linked to the Oswego Canal via connections to flour manufacturing in Oswego, along with purchase and transport of wood for both fuel and the barrels for the salt trade. At this time, tolls were being reduced in general in an attempt to keep the canals competitive in a world increasingly being taken over by the railroads. The waterways connecting to Oswego, such as the Welland Canal, did not reduce their tolls, and so shippers were more inclined to keep their cargo moving on the main Erie branch rather than bringing it up to Oswego. So the original Oswego Canal lasted until the early 20th century when New York State began the construction of the Barge Canal. The original Oswego Canal was closed, and a different version of it exists today as part of the New York State Canal system. One of the traces of the original still visible is Old Lock 5, known as Mud Lock. It was called this because it was constructed on very unstable soil. Remains of it today can be seen in Long Branch Park. This is the packet boat Schenectady in Mud Lock. And at one time there was even a tavern at Mud Lock. This is a pretty modern photo of the remains today. So the current Oswego Canal is 23.7 miles long and now runs from three rivers, ONEIDA River, Seneca River, and Oswego River, and uses the Oswego River, sometimes using artificial channels constructed along the riverbank, for its entire length, unlike the original canal, which switched back and forth between natural and man-made sections. It was opened for use in 1917. It is 14 feet deep, and it has 7 locks, numbered 01 through 08. You might be thinking to yourself, that math doesn't quite work. So I'm going to point out now that there is no lock 04. There are 3 such missing locks in the current canal system, and the reason for that is that they turned out to be unnecessary. A lock 04 was in the original plans for the current Oswego Canal, but the design changed during construction, and rather than renumbering the other locks on hand-drawn blueprints, the engineers just skipped it altogether. It's kind of funny to me. Speaking of locks, 3 of the 7 on the Oswego Canal are or were a bit unusual and kind of interesting. Lock 01 in Phoenix has 2 unique lift bridges, one inside the chamber. This one is actually obsolete and just stays open all the time, and one just a few feet downstream of the lock, which opens with the lower gate. So Ray Sachs is a local commercial illustrator whose retirement project was traveling to all 57 locks in the Barge Canal between 1988 and 1992, photographing them and then making drawings. They've been exhibited at the Erie Canal Museum twice, and all of the staff, including me, love them. It would be remiss of me not to include them in this talk. So this is his drawing of Lock 01. Lock 02 at Fulton has a swing bridge right across its center, which provides access to the hydroelectric dam. The bridge typically remains stationary for smaller vessels, which means the lock chamber size is actually cut in half. And of course, Ray Sachs also drew that one. And a particularly neat feature of the Oswego Canal is Lock 08. It was originally designed as a siphon lock, the only one that existed in the whole canal system. This lock operated without large valves and used the principles of a siphon to fill and empty the lock chamber by sucking the water in and out. It was first operated on May 28, 1910. The siphon principle had some reliability issues, but after working out the kinks, the lock was considered a success and was reasonably easy to operate by manipulating a 4-inch air valve. The main problem was that a vacuum was required in the tank so boats could continually lock through. The lock wasn't capable of holding the vacuum for more than a few hours at a time. In 1943, a vacuum pump was added to the system to keep it working. But just 25 years later, in 1968, the lock was converted to electric valves for operation. So now it operates just like the other locks, and there's very little external evidence remaining of its former uniqueness. There's Ray Sachs' drawing of Lock 08. There's a postcard image of construction of the Oswego Barge Canal. So the current elevation change between the start of the canal at Three Rivers and the terminus at Lake Ontario is 118 feet, and it takes a minimum of 6 hours to travel from one end to the other. The current New York State canal system sees primarily recreational traffic these days, and it is a major draw for tourism from people all over the world. I've got some additional interesting current canal images to show you. Here's a work-in-progress construction shot of the spillway at Oswego. And another postcard. I really love the postcard collection. This is Lock 07. And the Barge Canal at Fulton. So I thought it would be nice to incorporate some interesting local history of a few of the towns and cities along the Oswego Canal as part of this talk. So let's show a little love for some of New York's small towns, many of which wouldn't exist if not for the canals running through the state. The village of Phoenix was incorporated in 1848 and today sits at the beginning of the current Oswego Canal. The village's small business district was almost completely destroyed by a devastating fire that occurred September 23, 1916. So here's an image of Phoenix on the canal. Fulton is a city of almost 12,000 that has a very industrial history, which meant that the workforce of Fulton was very stable for a long period of time. During the Great Depression, Fulton was hailed by a New York City newspaper as the city the Great Depression missed. Here's Fulton in the days of the original Oswego Canal. And Ray Sachs's drawing of Lock 03 at Fulton. Minetto is another small town. It was once home to a textile factory that lasted nearly 100 years. It began as the Minetto Shade Cloth Company in 1879, and after a few mergers and takeovers became the Columbia Mills plant. This business is the reason that Minetto became a town of its own, separate from Oswego in 1916. The plant was closed in 1977. Ray Sachs yet again. This is Lock 05 at Minetto. And we come to Oswego. I have a soft spot for Oswego. It is the oldest U.S. port on the Great Lakes, and it was designated a port of entry regulated by U.S. Customs on March 2, 1799. It officially became a city in 1848. Oswego has been an active port for generations and was particularly important for military operations. Shipbuilding became a major industry for Oswego in the 18th century, and this lasted until the takeover of the railroads after the Civil War. Over 300 ships of all sizes were built in Oswego, many by immigrants to the area who brought their shipwright skills with them. Oswego Harbor teemed with vessels, and in the 1850s and 1860s, the city filled up during the weather off-season with sailors overwintering. Oswego boomed as a result of the canal, and some population figures illustrate this. Numbers went from 2,117 in 1830 to 4,000 in 1835, to 4,665 in 1840, to 5,837 in 1845, 12,205 in 1850, 15,816 in 1860, and 19,288 in 1865. The 19th century pinnacle of population for Oswego was 22,428 in 1875, and it has declined ever since. As of 2016, the population was 17,599 citizens. Bit of interesting Oswego history. Fort Ontario was a safe haven for refugees of the Holocaust and the only one of its kind in this country. About 1,000 war refugees were brought to Oswego from Italy. The conditions they endured at the refugee camp were less than optimal, with little freedom and opportunity, but this was the only attempt by the U.S. government to shelter refugees during the war. So here's Lock 06 at Oswego as drawn by Ray Sachs. And Lock 07. And we're going to finish with this aerial shot of Oswego from 1953. Thank you so much for listening to this video and hearing me talk about one of the smaller branches of the New York State canal system. We sometimes forget about the history around the lateral canals to Erie, but they are no less significant to the history of the Empire State. And I just want to mention yet again that the Erie Canal Museum is closed due to the COVID-19 pandemic. If you'd like to support the museum at this time, I will put a link right below the video. Thank you very much for your time. Stay healthy.